Captain David Rodriguez never thought he would be standing in a palace made of pure crystal, surrounded by beings who could read minds and had skin that shimmered like moonlight. But here he was, leading Earth's most important mission ever, trying to make friends with an alien race that might help humanity survive. The planet Zephyria Prime was unlike anything David had ever seen. Massive towers of blue crystal reached toward purple skies, and floating gardens drifted between buildings like colorful clouds. The people here, called Velonians, looked almost human except for their pale blue skin and eyes that seemed to glow from within. They moved with a grace that made even the most elegant humans look clumsy. David straightened his dress uniform as he walked through the grand hallway. Behind him, his small team of Earth's best diplomats tried not to stare at the wonders around them. Holographic artwork danced on the walls, showing scenes of Velonian history spanning thousands of years. The air itself seemed to sparkle with tiny particles of light that made everything look magical. "Remember," David whispered to his team, "we need this alliance. The Zerathi are coming, and without Velonian help, Earth doesn't stand a chance." The Zerathi were a machine-like race that had been conquering planets across the galaxy. Earth scouts had seen what they left behind: dead worlds stripped of all life. Humanity was still young in the galactic community, with basic space travel and simple weapons. The Velonians, however, had technology that seemed like magic and had fought the Zerathi before. As they entered the great reception hall, David's breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Hundreds of Velonians filled the space, their elegant robes flowing like water as they moved. At the far end, on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single massive diamond, sat Empress Zarathea. The Empress was beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. Her silver hair floated around her head as if she was underwater, and her violet eyes held wisdom that spoke of centuries of life. When she looked at David, he felt a strange warmth, as if she was seeing not just his face, but his very soul. "Welcome, people of Earth," her voice rang out, though David noticed her lips barely moved. The Velonians could speak directly into minds, he remembered. "We are curious to learn about your species." David stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, we are honored by your invitation. Humanity hopes to build a friendship between our worlds." A ripple of what sounded like laughter moved through the crowd, though not the friendly kind. David noticed many of the Velonians looking at him and his team with expressions that seemed almost amused, as if they were watching children play at being adults. Then she appeared. Princess Lirelei descended a floating staircase that materialized from thin air. She looked to be about 19 years old, with the same violet eyes as her mother, but a face that held no warmth. Her dark hair was woven with threads of light that pulsed like a heartbeat, and her gown seemed to be made of liquid starlight. When her eyes met David's, something strange happened. For just a moment, he felt like he was looking in a mirror. There was something familiar about her face, something that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite reach. "So these are the famous humans," Lirelei said, her mental voice carrying a tone of barely hidden disgust. "I was expecting something more impressive." The crowd chuckled, and David felt heat rise in his cheeks. But he kept his composure. "Your Highness, we may be young as a species, but we have much to offer in an alliance." "Oh, really?" Lirelei's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. And what could a race that has barely learned to leave their own planet possibly offer the Velonian Empire? David knew this was a test. Everything depended on how he handled this moment. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more effective than words, Your Highness." Empress Zarathea leaned forward on her throne, and David could swear he saw worry flash across her face. "What kind of demonstration, Captain Rodriguez?" "A combat exhibition, Your Majesty. I understand Velonians value skill in battle. I would be honored to show you how humans fight." The crowd murmured with interest now. Combat was something they understood and respected. Lirelei's eyes narrowed, and David caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like excitement. "Very well," the Empress said after a moment. "The training chamber will be prepared." An hour later, David stood in a room that defied physics. The walls, floor, and ceiling all seemed to be made of the same crystal as the palace, but they could become anything: forests, mountains, even the depths of space. For this demonstration, they had created a simple arena. David had changed into his combat gear, practical black clothing and lightweight armor that allowed for quick movement. In his hands, he held weapons that looked primitive compared to Valonian energy blades, but he knew how to use them well. The Valonian crowd had gathered to watch, floating on platforms that surrounded the arena like balconies in an ancient theater. Princess Lyrelei sat in the front, her chin resting on her hand as she watched with the bored expression of someone expecting to be disappointed. "Begin simulation," the Empress commanded. Suddenly, the arena filled with holographic enemies, creatures that looked like the Zarathi warriors David had seen in intelligence reports. They moved with mechanical precision, their metal claws gleaming as they attacked from all directions. What happened next surprised everyone. David moved like water, flowing around attacks that should have been impossible to dodge. His weapons flashed in patterns that seemed almost like a dance, each strike perfectly placed to disable rather than destroy. He used the environment to his advantage, turning the enemy's own strength against them. But what really caught the Valonians' attention was his strategy. While they expected him to simply fight with brute force, David was thinking 3 moves ahead. He led groups of enemies into traps, used their formations against them, and turned what looked like certain defeat into victory through clever tactics. When the simulation ended, the arena fell silent. David stood in the center, barely breathing, hard, surrounded by the fading images of defeated enemies. Then Princess Lyrelei began to clap, but it wasn't the sound of appreciation. It was slow, mocking applause that echoed through the chamber. "How primitive," she said, her mental voice dripping with scorn. "All that rolling around in the dirt, all that sweating and grunting. Is this really the best your species can manage?" The crowd tittered with laughter again, and David felt his face burn with embarrassment and anger. "Your techniques are so crude," Lyrelei continued, standing now and addressing the crowd as much as David. "No elegance, no grace, just brute force and desperation. How can beings who fight like wild animals possibly hope to stand against the Zarathi? How can they expect to be taken seriously by civilized species?" Her words cut deep because David knew that many humans had died learning to fight the way he just had. Every move, every strategy had been paid for in blood by soldiers who gave their lives protecting Earth. "Perhaps," Lyrelei said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it would be kinder to let the Zarathi have your planet quickly. It might spare you the embarrassment of a long defeat." The laughter grew louder now, and David clenched his fists. He wanted to respond, to defend his people and their sacrifices, but he knew that losing his temper here would destroy any chance of an alliance. But then something unexpected happened. "Lyrelei." The Empress's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "That is enough." The princess turned to her mother with surprise. "Mother, I was simply being honest about their capabilities." "No," Empress Zarathia said, rising from her throne. Her face had gone pale, and she was staring at David with an expression that looked almost like fear. "You were being cruel." The entire hall fell silent. In the sudden quiet, David could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The Empress continued to stare at him, and he saw something in her violet eyes that made his chest tighten with the emotion he couldn't name. Those eyes, they were exactly like the princess's eyes, and somehow, impossibly, they were exactly like his own. "Captain Rodriguez," the Empress said quietly, "please accept our apologies for this discourtesy. Perhaps we could speak privately after the reception." David nodded, not trusting his voice. But as he looked between the Empress and her daughter, questions began forming in his mind. Questions about violet eyes and familiar faces. About a memory from 20 years ago that he had tried so hard to forget. A memory of a woman with silver hair and skin like moonlight, who had disappeared from his life as suddenly as she had entered, it leaving behind only the faint scent of starflowers and the echo of a voice that spoke directly to his heart. As the crowd began to disperse and conversation resumed, David caught Princess Lyrelei staring at him with a new expression. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The Crystal Palace felt different at night. The walls that sparkled like diamonds during the day now glowed with a soft blue light that made everything look like it was underwater. Princess Lyrelei paced back and forth in her private chambers, her footsteps silent on the smooth floor that seemed to be made of frozen starlight. She couldn't get the human captain out of her mind, not because she was impressed by him, definitely not. But something about his face kept bothering her, like a song she almost remembered but couldn't quite place. And those eyes, why did they look so familiar? "Your Highness," came her mother's voice from the doorway. Empress Zarathea entered the room, but instead of her usual regal bearing, she looked tired, worried even. "Mother, I hope you're not here to lecture me about being nice to the humans," Lyrelei said, not stopping her pacing. "I was simply being honest. They are primitive creatures who have no business pretending to be our equals." The Empress closed the door behind her with a gesture, and Lyrelei heard the soft sound of privacy shields activating. No one would be able to hear their conversation now, not even with Vylonian telepathy. "Lyrelei, we need to talk about what happened today." "What's there to talk about?" I pointed out the obvious truth about these humans and their crude fighting methods. "Did you see how that captain rolled around on the ground like some kind of animal? And those weapons, so basic, so effective," her mother interrupted, quietly. Lyrelei stopped pacing and turned to face the Empress. "What?" His fighting style was effective, brutal perhaps, but it worked. He defeated 20 Zarathi warriors without taking a single hit. "Lucky guesses." Lyrelei waved her hand dismissively. "Any civilized warrior with proper training could have done the same thing with half the effort and twice the grace." "Empress." Zarathea walked to the large window that looked out over the crystal city. The purple sky was filled with 3 moons, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. "You speak with such certainty about things you don't understand." "I understand. Perfectly well, Mother. These humans are beneath us. They've barely learned to travel between stars, they have no telepathic abilities, and they solve everything with violence. Why should we help them fight the Zarathi? Let them learn to stand on their own. And if they fall, then they fall. The galaxy will be better off without another violent species spreading through it." The words hung in the air between them like a poison cloud. Empress Zarathea turned from the window, and Lyrelei was surprised to see tears in her mother's violet eyes. "You really believe that?" the Empress said softly. "You really believe that humans are worthless?" "Of course I do. It's the truth. We've always known that Vylonians are the most advanced, most civilized species in the galaxy. These humans with their dirt and their sweat and their crude emotions, they're everything we've evolved beyond." "Their crude emotions," her mother repeated, and something in her voice made Lyrelei pause. "Tell me, daughter, what do you know about love?" The question caught Lyrelei off guard. "Love? What does love have to do with anything? It's just a basic biological drive, something primitive species use to encourage reproduction. We Vylonians have evolved beyond such simple needs. Have we?" The Empress sat down heavily in a chair that molded itself to her body. "Have we really?" "Mother, what's wrong with you? You're acting strange. Did the humans do something to you? Some kind of mind trick?" Empress Zarathea laughed, but it was a sound filled with pain rather than joy. "A mind trick, yes, you could call it that. The oldest mind trick in the universe." Lyrelei felt a chill run down her spine. Her mother was talking in riddles, and the air in the room felt heavy with secrets that were fighting to break free. 20 years ago, the Empress began, her voice distant as if she was speaking from a dream. "I was not yet the ruler of our empire. I was young, like you are now, and I believed many of the same things you believe. What does this have to do with the humans?" "Everything." Zarathea looked up at her daughter, and Lyrelei saw something in her eyes that made her heart race. 20 years ago, I went on a secret mission to Earth." The words hit Lyrelei like a physical blow. "You what?" "We had detected Zarathi scouts near human space. I took a small ship and went to investigate, to see if these humans posed any threat to us or if they might be useful as a buffer between us and the Zarathi. Lyrelei sank into a chair across from her mother. You went to Earth? But that's impossible. The Council would never have allowed it. Contact with primitive species is forbidden without full approval, which is why it was a secret mission. The Empress's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. I spent 3 months there studying their culture, their military capabilities, their society, and I learned something that shocked me. What? They weren't primitive at all. Oh, their technology was simple compared to ours, and they couldn't read minds or manipulate crystal matrices. But they had something we had lost long ago. And what was that? Passion. Real, honest emotion. They loved deeply, fought fiercely, and felt everything with an intensity that took my breath away. Zarathia's voice grew softer, and there was one human in particular who showed me just how wrong I had been about their species. Lyrelei's stomach began to twist with a fear she couldn't name. Mother, please don't tell me you... His name was David Rodriguez. He was a young military officer, brilliant and brave and kind. He saved my life when Zarathi scouts attacked the research station where I was working undercover. The Empress closed her eyes. And I fell in love with him. The room spun around Lyrelei. This couldn't be happening. Her mother, the perfect example of Valonian superiority, had fallen in love with a human? It was impossible. It was disgusting. It was... That's the man from today, she whispered, the pieces falling into place like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. The captain, that's him. Yes. But you left Earth. You came back and became Empress and never spoke of this again. I had to. My father died and I was needed here. The Empire was in chaos and I was the only heir. I couldn't abandon my people for personal happiness no matter how much I wanted to. But you never told him you were leaving? Zarathia's face crumpled with old pain. I couldn't. He would have tried to come with me or asked me to stay, and I knew I couldn't choose him over billions of Valonians who needed their Empress. Lyrelei stood up shakily. So you left him. You abandoned him and came back here and pretended it never happened. Not pretended. I could never pretend it didn't happen. The Empress looked at her daughter with eyes full of love and sorrow. Because I brought something back with me from Earth. Something precious. The fear in Lyrelei's stomach became a roaring terror. What are you saying? I'm saying that when I returned to Zephyria Prime, I was pregnant. The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Lyrelei felt the world shift beneath her feet, felt everything she had ever believed about herself cracking like broken glass. No, she whispered. No, that's impossible. I'm pure Valonian. My genetics were tested. I have the royal bloodline. I have telepathic abilities. I can manipulate crystal technology. I can't be half human, her mother finished gently. Yes, my daughter, you are. Lyrelei staggered backward until her back hit the wall. You're lying. This is some kind of test or a lesson or something. I can't be half human. I hate humans. They're beneath us. They're animals. They're... Your father. The two words broke something inside Lyrelei's chest. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor staring at her mother with wide eyes. Captain David Rodriguez, the Empress continued, her voice gentle but firm, is your father. The man you mocked today, the man you called primitive and crude. He is the other half of your genetic heritage. But I don't look human. I have blue skin and violet eyes and telepathic abilities. Valonian genetics are dominant in most traits. But look closer, daughter. Look at your face in a mirror and tell me you don't see him there. And suddenly Lyrelei could see it. The shape of her nose, the line of her jaw, the way her eyebrows curved. They were all slightly different from typical Valonian features. Slightly more human. That's why he looked familiar, she whispered. Yes. And that's why I had to stop you today when you were being cruel to him. You were mocking your own father, insulting the man whose courage and intelligence flows through your veins. Lyrelay put her head in her hands. How could you do this to me? How could you let me grow up believing I was something I'm not? Because I wanted to protect you. Do you think the Valonian court would accept a half-human princess? Do you think the people would follow a ruler with inferior genetics? So you lied to everyone, to the genetic testers, to the council, to me. I altered the records. I used my royal privileges to ensure that no one would ever question your heritage. And I raised you to be the perfect Valonian princess, hoping that if you never knew the truth, you would never have to face the prejudice that would come with it. Lyrelay looked up at her mother with eyes full of pain and anger. And what about him? What about David? Doesn't he deserve to know he has a daughter? The Empress was quiet for a long moment. I've thought about telling him every day for 20 years, but what would I say? Hello, I'm the alien woman who disappeared from your life 2 decades ago, and by the way, you have a daughter who's been raised to believe you're... Lyrelay didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David Rodriguez's face looking back at her, not as the human captain she had mocked, but as the father she never knew she had. The crystal walls of her chamber, which had always felt like home, now seemed like prison bars holding her captive in a life built on lies. She stood before her mirror as the 3 moons set and the purple dawn began to break over Zephyria Prime. Her reflection stared back with violet eyes that she now knew came from her father's human genetics. Her blue skin, her telepathic abilities, her graceful movements, all Valonian. But underneath it all was something else. Something she had never recognized before. What am I? She whispered to her reflection, and for the first time in her life, she had no answer. Meanwhile, in the guest quarters provided for the human delegation, David Rodriguez was having his own sleepless night. He sat by the window, looking out at the impossible beauty of the Crystal City, but his mind was 20 years in the past. Her name had been Zara. She told him she was a researcher from a distant colony, studying human military tactics for her doctoral thesis. For 3 months she had worked alongside him at the Luna Defense Station, and David had fallen harder than he ever thought possible. She was brilliant, mysterious and beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. Then one morning, she was simply gone. No goodbye, no explanation, no forwarding address. Just an empty room and the faint scent of starflowers that he had never smelled anywhere else. David had tried to find her for years. He searched through colony records, contacted research universities across known space, even hired private investigators. But it was as if Zara had never existed at all. Eventually, he accepted that she must have been running from something. Maybe a bad relationship, maybe trouble with the law. He told himself she had her reasons for leaving and he tried to move on, but he never forgot those violet eyes. Now, seeing Empress Zarathea, he was almost certain they were the same person. But how could that be? The woman he knew was a simple researcher, not the ruler of an alien empire. And yet when she looked at him during the reception, he saw recognition there. She knew him too. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Captain Rodriguez?" came a voice from the hallway. "The Empress requests your presence in the private garden. She says it's urgent." David's heart began to race. This was it, the conversation that would either confirm his suspicions or prove that 20 years of wondering had driven him slightly crazy. The private garden was unlike anything David had ever seen. Plants from a dozen different worlds grew together in perfect harmony, their colors shifting and changing as they responded to the emotional states of anyone nearby. Right now, everything seemed to pulse with anxiety and fear. Empress Zarathea stood beside a fountain that appeared to be made of liquid light. She wore simple robes instead of her royal regalia, and in the soft morning light David could see the woman he had once loved shining through the powerful ruler she had become. "Hello, David," she said softly, and her voice was exactly the same, as he remembered. "Zara." The name came out as barely a whisper. "It really is you." She nodded, tears beginning to form in her violet eyes. I know you must have questions. 20 years worth, David said, walking closer to her, starting with why you left without saying goodbye. Because I couldn't say goodbye. Zarathia's voice broke slightly. Because if I had tried to explain, I would have never been able to leave. And I had to leave, David. My people needed me. Your people? You told me you were just a researcher. I was researching, but not for a thesis. I was gathering intelligence for the Valonian Empire. My father was dying, and I was the only heir to the throne. But before I could take power, I needed to understand the species that lived near our borders. David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. So everything between us was just part of your mission? I was just a source of information? No. Zarathia stepped toward him, her hand reaching out before she pulled it back. David, what happened between us was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. That's what made it so hard to leave. But you did leave, and you never tried to contact me. Never let me know you were alive or safe. How could I? I was about to become the empress of an empire that views humans as primitive creatures barely worthy of notice. If anyone had discovered our relationship, it would have been seen as a scandal that could have destroyed everything I was trying to build. David ran his hands through his hair, trying to process everything she was telling him. So you chose your empire over what we had. I chose my responsibility to billions of people over my personal happiness, just like you would choose Earth over everything else if it came down to it. She was right, and David hated that she was right. He would sacrifice anything for Earth's safety, even his own life. But knowing that didn't make the pain of her abandonment any less real. There's something else, Zarathia said quietly. Something I should have told you 20 years ago. David looked at her, and the fear in her eyes made his stomach clench. What? When I left Earth, I was carrying your child. The world stopped. David heard the words, but they didn't make sense at first. Then, slowly, the implications began to sink in. A child, he repeated numbly. We had a child. A daughter. She's 19 years old now, and she's beautiful and intelligent and strong. Zarathia's voice was filled with love and pride, and she has no idea who her real father is. Where is she? David's voice was urgent now. Can I see her? Can I meet her? Zarathia looked away. You've already met her, David. Yesterday at the reception. It took David a moment to understand. Then the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Princess Lirelei. The name came out as a whisper. The girl who mocked me and called humans primitive animals, that's my daughter. Yes. David sat down heavily on a bench beside the fountain. His daughter, had spent the previous day insulting everything he stood for, everything he was. And she had no idea she was talking to her own father. Does she know? He asked. I told her last night. She's not taking it well. I can imagine. She thinks humans are beneath her, and now she finds out she's half human herself. David looked up at Zarathia. How could you let her grow up, hating what she is? I thought I was protecting her. Zarathia's composure finally cracked. Do you know what would happen if the Valonian court discovered their princess was half human? She would lose everything. Her title, her inheritance, her future. They might even exile her from the empire entirely. So instead, you let her grow, up believing lies about herself and her own father's people. I thought it was better than the alternative. Was it? Look at her, Zara. She's filled with hatred for half of what she is. She's been taught to despise the very qualities that make her special. Before Zarathia could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. Both parents turned to see Princess Lirelei standing at the garden entrance. She looked like she hadn't slept at all, and her usual perfect composure was nowhere to be seen. Her violet eyes, so much like David's own, were red from crying. Lirelei. Zarathia started forward, but the princess held up a hand to stop her. I've been thinking all night, Lirelei said, her voice shaky but determined. About everything. You told me, Mother. About him. She looked at David with an expression that was part anger, part curiosity, part fear. About what I am. David stood up slowly, not wanting to frighten her away. Princess, I know this must be overwhelming. Overwhelming. Lyrelei laughed, but there was no humor in it. I spent yesterday calling my own father a primitive animal. I mocked his fighting style, insulted his species, and suggested the galaxy would be better off without humans. And all the while, half of my DNA was exactly the same as his. Lyrelei, you didn't know, Zarathea said gently. That doesn't make it better, Mother. If anything, it makes it worse. Lyrelei walked closer to them, and David could see that she was trembling. I've spent my entire life believing I was pure Valonian nobility. I've looked down on other species, especially humans, because I was taught they were inferior to us in every way. And now? David asked quietly. Now I don't know what to believe. Lyrelei sat down on the bench across from him, studying his face. When I look at you, I can see parts of myself I never noticed before. The shape of your eyes, the way you hold your head when you're thinking. It's like looking at a puzzle piece that finally fits. They sat in silence for a moment, father and daughter seeing each other clearly for the first time. I have so many questions, Lyrelei finally said. So do I, David replied. Like, what are you interested in? What do you like to do? What makes you laugh? The questions seemed to surprise Lyrelei. She had probably expected him to ask about royal duties or political matters, not personal things. I like to study military history, she said hesitantly, especially battle tactics and strategy. David smiled for the first time since arriving on Zephyria Prime. Really? That was always my favorite subject too. And I enjoy piloting spacecraft. I have my own ship that I designed myself. Engineering was my second choice for a career after military service. As they talked, Lyrelei began to relax slightly, but David could see the emergency council meeting was supposed to decide Princess Lyrelei's fate. Instead, it was interrupted by the sound of alarms that had never been heard in the Crystal Palace before. The warning signals for an enemy attack. Admiral Thane's face went pale as he pressed his hand to his communication device. Impossible, he whispered. Long-range sensors are detecting Zarathi ships approaching the outer system, hundreds of them. Empress Zarathea stood up from her throne, her royal composure returning instantly despite the personal crisis they had been facing. How did they get past our early warning systems? Unknown, Your Majesty. But they'll be here within hours. David stepped forward, his military training taking over. Your Majesty, with your permission, I'd like to review your defense plans. This is not your concern, human, Admiral Thane snapped. Valonian military matters are not for outsiders. Right now, Admiral, I think we need all the help we can get, the Empress said firmly. Captain Rodriguez, please proceed. As the council chamber filled with military officers and urgent reports, Lyrelei found herself watching her father work. David studied the holographic displays showing Valonian ship positions and defensive systems with the eye of someone who had spent his whole life preparing for battles like this. Your outer defense grid is impressive, David said after several minutes. But you're thinking like you're fighting other Valonians. The Zarathi don't follow the same tactical rules. And you know this how? Admiral Thane demanded. Because humans have been fighting them for 3 years. We've lost 12 colonies and learned some hard lessons along the way. The room fell silent. Even Admiral Thane looked shocked. 12 colonies. We weren't informed of this. Because we kept it classified. We didn't want to cause a galaxy-wide panic. David turned to the Empress. Your Majesty, the Zarathi don't fight to conquer territory or resources. They fight to eliminate all organic life. They see biological beings as a disease that needs to be cured. Princess Lyrelei stepped closer to the tactical display. What do you mean? They're not really alive, not the way we understand it. They're a machine intelligence that converted their original biological creators into cybernetic beings centuries ago. Now they're trying to do the same thing to everyone else in the galaxy. That's why they're here, David continued, pointing at the display. Not to rule Violonia, but to wipe it out completely. A new alarm sounded, and one of the officers reported, "First wave entering orbit, Your Majesty. 300 ships and counting." Through the crystal walls of the palace, they could see the first explosions beginning in space above them. The Sirathi ships were sleek, dark vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with mechanical precision, targeting Violonian defense platforms with devastating efficiency. "Our orbital defenses are holding," Admiral Thane reported, "but barely." David studied the battle patterns appearing on the screen. "They're not trying to break through your defenses yet. They're testing them, learning your response patterns." "Learning for what?" "For the real attack. This is just the beginning." As if summoned by his words, the space around Zephyria Prime suddenly filled with thousands of new contacts. The main Zarathi fleet had arrived. By the crystal throne, someone whispered, "There are so many of them." The Violonian fleet, which had seemed impressive minutes before, was now outnumbered 10-1. Their graceful ships, designed as much for beauty as function, faced an enemy that cared nothing for elegance or honor. "Admiral Thane," the Empress commanded, "deploy all available ships to defensive positions around the planet." "Your Majesty," David interrupted, "that's exactly what they want you to do." "Excuse me?" "The Zarathi have studied your tactics too. They know Valonians value honor and will try to protect your homeworld at all costs. They're counting on you clustering your forces here so they can destroy everything at once." Admiral Thane's face was red with anger. "Are you suggesting we abandon our planet?" "I'm suggesting you think like them instead of like yourselves." David pointed at the display. "Look at their formation. They're not attacking randomly. They're herding your ships into a specific area." Princess Lyrily studied the patterns her father was indicating. Suddenly she gasped. "It's a trap. They want our ships bunched together so they can use some kind of weapon that affects multiple targets." "Exactly." David looked at her with pride. "You have good tactical instincts." "She has human instincts," Admiral Thane said with disgust. "Right. Now that might be exactly what we need," Empress Zarathia said firmly. The first wave of Zarathi ships broke through the outer defenses, and the battle moved into Zephyria Prime's atmosphere. From the palace windows, they could see streams of energy fire lighting up the purple sky as Valonian fighters engaged the invaders. "David," the Empress turned to him, "what do you recommend?" Admiral Thane started to protest, but she silenced him with a look. "I asked Captain Rodriguez, Admiral." David thought for a moment. "Split your forces. Send half to engage the main fleet at maximum range, but don't let them get surrounded. Use hit-and-run tactics to keep them off balance. The other half should focus on protecting critical ground installations." "That goes against every principle of Valonian naval warfare," Admiral Thane objected. "Good," Lyrily said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "If it goes against our principles, then the Zarathi won't expect it." "Princess?" Admiral Thane's voice was warning. "No, she's right," David said. "The Zarathi have been studying Violonian tactics for who knows how long. The only advantage you have is doing something they haven't planned for." A massive explosion shook the palace, and reports started coming in of Zarathi ground forces landing on the planet's surface. "Your Majesty," came an urgent communication. "Enemy forces have breached the capital city's outer defenses. They're moving toward the palace." Empress Zarathia stood up. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel. Activate the palace defense systems." "I'm staying," Lyrily announced. "Absolutely not," her mother replied. "You're the heir to the throne. You must be protected. I'm also half human, which apparently makes me good at thinking like our enemies." Lyrily's voice was steady but determined. "You need me here." David felt a surge of pride watching his daughter stand up for what she believed in. But he also felt fear. She was talking about staying in a palace that was about to become a battlefield. "If she stays, I stay," he said firmly. "Captain Rodriguez, you have no obligation to fight for Vilonia," the Empress said. "Maybe not for Vilonia," David replied, looking at Lyrily, "but I have every obligation to fight for my daughter." The word daughter seemed to echo in the chamber. For the first time, David had claimed Lyrelai publicly as his child, and she had not denied it. Very well, Empress Zarathea said. Admiral Thane, implement Captain Rodriguez's strategy. Split the fleet and engage the enemy on multiple fronts. Your Majesty, I must protest. You must follow orders, Admiral. As the military officers dispersed to carry out the new battle plan, David found himself alone with Lyrelai and her mother, as the palace prepared for siege. I've never fought alongside humans before, Lyrelai said quietly, checking the energy weapon she had strapped to her side. I've never fought alongside telepaths before, David replied, adjusting his own gear. Then we'll both be learning something new. The crystal walls of the palace began to shift and flow, reconfiguring themselves into defensive positions. Weapon. Ports opened in surfaces that had been decorative moments before, and force fields shimmered to life across windows and doorways. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. The distinctive whine of Zarathi energy weapons mixed with the musical tones of Valonian crystal technology. "They're in the palace grounds," came a report from the guards. David positioned himself at a window that gave him a view of the approaching enemy. The Zarathi ground forces were unlike anything he had seen before. Part machine, part corrupted organic matter, moving with unnatural coordination. They're not trying to capture the palace, he realized. They're trying to destroy it completely. Princess, Lyrelai joined him at the window, her telepathic senses extended. I can feel them thinking. It's horrible. Like ice water in my mind. They see us as an infection that needs to be cleansed. Can you use that connection? David asked. Can you predict what they'll do next? Lyrelai concentrated, her face pale with the effort of touching the alien minds. They're going to breach the main hall in 3 minutes. 12 soldiers armed with plasma cutters and neural disruptors. Then we'll be ready for them. Father and daughter took positions on either side of the main entrance, with Empress Zarathea coordinating the palace defenses from the command center. When the Zarathi broke through, they moved with mechanical precision, exactly as Lyrelai had predicted. But they weren't prepared for the combination of David's tactical unpredictability and Lyrelai's telepathic awareness. David moved like water, using the crystal architecture to his advantage, turning corners into ambush points and decorative elements into weapons. Lyrelai supported him with perfect timing, her telepathy letting her warn him of attacks before they came and coordinate their movements without speaking. For the first time, Princess Lyrelai wasn't fighting like a pure Valonian noble. She was fighting like someone who combined the best of both her heritages, the grace and mental abilities. The command center fell silent. Even the sounds of battle outside seemed to pause as everyone processed what David had just said. Surrender. Admiral Thane's voice was filled with outrage. Never. Valonians do not surrender to anyone, especially not to mechanical monsters. That's exactly why it will work, David said urgently. The Zarathi have studied your culture. They know you would rather die fighting than give up. They're not prepared for surrender because they don't think you're capable of it. Princess Lyrelai stepped closer to her father. What are you thinking? The Zarathi want to convert organic life, not destroy it completely. If we surrender, they'll try to bring the leadership to their conversion facilities instead of just wiping everyone out immediately. And that helps us how? Empress Zarathea asked. Because their conversion ships are the heart of their entire operation. If we can get inside one and disable it, the whole fleet becomes vulnerable. Admiral Thane shook his head. It's too risky. We'd be putting the royal family directly in enemy hands. We're going to lose anyway if we keep fighting like this, Lyrelai pointed out. At least this plan gives us a chance. David looked at his daughter with new respect. In just a few hours, she had gone from a prejudiced princess to someone willing to risk everything for her people, both Valonian and human. There's something else, David continued. The Zarathi conversion process doesn't work the same way on humans as it does on other species. Human neural patterns are too chaotic for their technology to fully control. That's why they've been trying to wipe us out instead of convert us. But Lyrelai is only half human, the Empress said, which might be exactly what we need. She could resist the conversion process long enough to sabotage their systems from the inside. Lyreley felt a chill run down her spine. You're asking me to let them try to turn me into one of them. I'm asking you to trust that your human heritage will protect you just long enough to save both our species. The palace shook with another explosion, and reports came in that the Zarathi had breached the inner defenses. Your Majesty, came Admiral Thane's urgent voice over the communicator. We need orders. Do we retreat or make a final stand? Empress. Zarathia looked at David, then at Lyreley. Daughter, this is your choice. I won't order you to take this risk. Lyreley was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened in the past day. 24 hours ago, she had been a princess who thought she was better than every other species in the galaxy. Now she was being asked to sacrifice herself to save those same species. But as she looked at her father, really looked at him, seeing not a primitive human but a brilliant man who had spent his life protecting others, she realized something important. I'm not doing this as Princess Lyreley of the Valonian Empire, she said finally. I'm doing this as the daughter of David Rodriguez and Zarathia, as someone who represents both humans and Valonians. David felt his chest tighten with pride and fear. Are you sure? I'm sure, but I'm not doing it alone. Lyreley turned to her mother. I need you to send a message to the entire fleet, both Valonian and human ships. What message? That Princess Lyreley, daughter of Empress Zarathia and Captain David Rodriguez, hereby announces that the age of species separation is over. From this moment forward, humans and Valonians fight as one people. The words sent shockwaves through the command center. Admiral Thane looked like he might faint, while several other officers began protesting at once. Silence. Empress Zarathia commanded. Send the message. Within minutes, the announcement was being broadcast across the battlefield. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Some Valonian pilots broke formation in confusion, while others began coordinating with human ships for the first time in galactic history. Now what? Admiral Thane asked, still looking stunned. Now we surrender, David said. But we do it smart. The next hour was the longest of David's life. He watched as his daughter, accompanied by a small guard detail, walked out of the palace under a white flag of surrender. The Zarathi, as predicted, were so shocked by this unprecedented action that they held their fire. Lyreley was taken aboard the main Zarathi conversion ship, a massive vessel that looked like a mechanical cathedral twisted into impossible shapes. David tracked her progress through the ship's corridors via her telepathic connection to her mother. She's reached the conversion chamber, Empress Zarathia reported, her face pale with concentration. They're starting the process. David gripped the edge of the command console. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to rush to his daughter's rescue, but he forced himself to wait. She's fighting it, the Empress continued. The machine is trying to map her neural patterns, but her human genetics are confusing the system. Minutes passed like hours. On the tactical display, they could see the Zarathi fleet holding position, waiting for their conversion process to succeed, so they could add Valonian telepathic abilities to their collective intelligence. Then suddenly, alarms began sounding on Zarathi ships throughout the fleet. She did it, David breathed. She's in their system. What happened next was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The Zarathi conversion ship began broadcasting Lyreley's telepathic signal, amplified by their own technology. But instead of converting her thoughts to their mechanical collective, she was pushing her consciousness into their network. And she wasn't alone. Every Valonian with telepathic ability suddenly felt Princess Lyreley's mind calling to theirs. She was asking them to link with her, to add their mental strength to hers as she fought the Zarathi from inside their own system. All telepaths, join the link, Empress Zarathia commanded across all frequencies. Give the princess your strength. Hundreds, then thousands of Valonian minds connected across space, creating a telepathic network more powerful than anything the Zarathi had ever encountered. Through Lyreley, they began systematically shutting down Zarathi ships one by one. But the strain was enormous. David could see his daughter on the view screen, her face twisted with effort as she fought a battle that was taking place as much in her mind as in physical space. She can't hold this much longer, the Empress said, tears streaming down her face. The connection is burning her out. That's when David realized what he had to do. Get me to that ship, he told Admiral Thane. What? That's suicide. Maybe, but I'm not losing my daughter after just finding her. David, no. Empress Zarathea grabbed his arm. If you die, she'll never forgive herself. If I don't try to save her, I'll never forgive myself. Before anyone could stop him, David ran for the hangar where a small Valonian fighter was being prepared for launch. He had never flown alien technology before, but desperation made him a quick learner. The trip to the Zarathi ship was a nightmare of energy fire and mechanical defenders. But somehow David made it through. He crashed the fighter into the conversion ship's hull and fought his way through corridors filled with creatures that had once been organic beings from a dozen different species. He found Lyrelai in the center of the ship, connected to a machine that was trying to drain her mind while she used its own power against it. She was unconscious but fighting, her face pale as moonlight. I'm here, David whispered, taking her hand. I'm not leaving you. And then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Using the same neural interface that the Zarathi were using on his daughter, David connected his own mind to the network. He wasn't telepathic like the Valonians, but he was Lyrelai's father. The genetic connection between them created a bridge that allowed him to share her burden. His tactical thinking, combined with her telepathic abilities and the strength of thousands of Valonian minds, finally overwhelmed the Zarathi system. Across the fleet, Zarathi ships began shutting down as their collective intelligence collapsed. The mechanical beings that had once been organic creatures found themselves free for the first time in centuries, and many chose to turn against their former masters. When Lyrelai finally opened her eyes, she was lying in the palace medical center, with both her parents beside her. Did we win? She asked weakly. We won, David confirmed. The Zarathi fleet is destroyed, and the survivors are asking for asylum so they can try to recover their original personalities. And the council? What? Did they decide about my mixed heritage? Empress Zarathea smiled. After watching a half-human princess save the empire using abilities that came from both sides of her genetics, the council decided that maybe it's time to reconsider their ideas about species purity. What does that mean? It means, David said, that you're still a princess. But more importantly, you're also my daughter, and I couldn't be more proud of you. Over the following weeks, as Zephyria Prime rebuilt from the attack, something unprecedented began happening. Humans and Valonians started working together not as separate species forming an alliance, but as extended family. Princess Lyrelai became the symbol of this new unity. In her coronation speech, delivered to representatives from both worlds, she spoke about the strength that comes from embracing all parts of yourself instead of hiding from them. I spent my life believing that being pure Valonian made me superior, she said, her voice carrying across crystal halls and human assembly chambers alike. But I learned that my real strength comes not from being one thing or another, but from being both.